me?
Beautiful, beautiful. I must be beautiful.
It's easy to assume that Nier Automata is purely a product of Japanese eccentricity, one that is plagued by shameless fan service of its female characters, and it is easy to see why as well, especially when you look at the designs of our main character 2B and everyone's fascination with her behind. However, Nier Automata is anything but pure that. Say what you want about the design of 2B, within the game's complex and sometimes convoluted narrative, the game doesn't stoop into the realms of merely satisfying fanboy curiosities. In fact, the game treats its characters with respect, mostly. Not just with 2B, but also with her plucky sidekick 9S as well. But before we discuss a story that's got everyone talking, let's put our attention on what should matter first. Nier Automata is still a video game, and has to play well before boasting any other strengths that it may have. Being a Platinum game, this is almost a given, and I'm glad to report that this is more Bayonetta or Metal Gear Rising kind of Platinum than Legend of Korra kind of Platinum. The game's combat is solid, from the tight and responsive controls to the slick animation that the developer is known for. There's great gratification in witnessing 2B whack her enemies with extreme aggression while switching between weapons on the fly, nimbly. And for the most part, they are generally easy to perform. All of this makes Nier Automata sound like an easy game, and it kinda is if you're used to other games by Platinum or those made by Hideki Kamiya. The game relies a lot on timing your evasions to get the much needed advantage on your enemies, like those in Bayonetta, but I find this extremely easy to pull off as enemies in this game telegraph their movements often. Bosses are tricky at times, but can be approached using similar tactics for almost all of the encounters. I'd recommend those who want challenge to crank the difficulty up a bit, but only if you have the best equipment, since the enemies are frustratingly capable of nailing you down with a couple of hits in the harder settings. So there is that issue with difficulty balancing. There's also constant change in combat where you're put into sections reminiscent of old school bullet hell games like Ikaruga or Binding of Isaac. These moments are okay at first, but are drawn out way too much at times as you progress, and can feel like a chore instead of an exciting distraction from the usual combat sections. There are also tons of things to collect in this game, some for upgrade purposes, and some to sell so you have more money to pursue your chip upgrades. This, in my opinion, is one of the weaker aspects of the game. Collecting stuff is not really terrible, but it isn't an exciting process either. Most of the quests that require you to pick up some items rarely deviate from the mundane process of going to a location, defeating some enemies, and going back to the quest giver. In other words, fetch quests that are sometimes dull. Fortunately, things that you can upgrade like chips and pods that you allocate on 2B do make a difference in this game. Some help you with combat, and some for things like fishing and locating certain special objects. So there is that sense of progression for all of the characters. Exploration is another huge aspect of the game, and some may find fault with the game's open world design feeling a little empty and repetitive. To be fair, this is a post-apocalyptic world in a distant future where mankind is no longer the residents of the planet, so everything is supposed to feel arid and lifeless. In that sense, it serves the narrative perfectly. However, you do a lot of backtracking in this game, so it tends to make going through the same area a tiring process, and the same placement of enemies every time doesn't really help the game break away from a certain degree of monotony. Thankfully, the game has a soundtrack that makes sprinting through the decrepit structures a memorable experience, and what a soundtrack it is. A lot of games with a theme of decadence tend to use soundtracks that are more subdued, like Gustavo Santaola's work in The Last of Us, to let the atmosphere convey how terrible and lonely this world is. The soundtrack in Nier Automata is the opposite for the most part. It glorifies that feeling of loneliness with some strong orchestral sounds and vocals from the plains to the desert, as the game seems to want you to soak into this lonesome experience. And by goodness, it works so damn well. But when the tougher moments do come around, the music shifts into hauntingly disconsolate tunes, and the forlorn feelings it evokes are well deserved.
I wish you good hunting.
Glory to mankind!
Glory to mankind!
Glory to mankind.
However, the music is not the best quality of Nier Automata, as I would say that goes to its heartbreaking story of existence and survival. And such storytelling is only possible through the medium of the video game. The game's story doesn't leave much of an impression for the first time you play it, but as you go through the subsequent playthroughs, much of the details within the lore is peeled off, revealing shocking and heartbreaking revelations for the main characters. I admit that the first and second playthroughs could have been merged to make the experience feel less padded, but it didn't bother me that much, considering how pleasantly surprised I was at where the story took me. There are some weird idiosyncrasies that are synonymous with Japanese developers, but the ones in Nier Automata usually reference to the previous Nier game, which I have never played, or it is to allude something bigger in the story that have already happened or is happening. Visually, the game is not what you call stunning, but the developers did enough to make the game at least look easy on the eyes for the most part. Some of the open areas are things that you have seen in most other depictions of post-apocalyptic worlds, lots of greens and grays and brown, but there are some places like the amusement park or desert that are ponderously enjoyable to explore, and it is mostly thanks to the amazing soundtrack that accompanies you in your journey. Nier Automata may not be remembered as a truly original experience from a gameplay standpoint, as the things that it does well, like the combat, are mostly things that we have seen before, and that's not really a bad thing. However, the sheer strength of its story and music combines for an impressive experience. Don't be fooled by its reputation as a game with a sexy protagonist, as 2B and the others may well linger within your mind long after the many credits of the game roll.